Hi, everybody. This is David Nevins for Citybiz List, and today we continue with our series on behalf of the Bridge Alliance called Fixing America's Broken Democracy. And we have a special guest with us today, Uriel Epshtein. Uriel is the executive director of the Renew Democracy Initiative. Uriel, welcome to our program.
Thank you, David, for having me.
My pleasure. So why don't we just begin with, tell us a little bit about yourself, Uriel, and certainly the Renew Democracy Initiative, what it is and what it does.
Yeah, absolutely. So look, my own background is kind of unique. I started my career in the private sector, and I was always somewhat politically inclined, but I was a big believer that before going into public service, one should really get experience and develop actual tangible skills in the private sector before transitioning. And so I started my career at the Boston Consulting Group as a management consultant, and then I worked in the tech space, focused on the transportation sector. So think companies like Uber and DoorDash. And it really was a terrific experience. I think it was incredibly educational, and I actually do wish that more people in the nonprofit space had some private sector experience. But a few years ago, it became clear to me that we were facing, what essentially amounted to an existential crisis. More than 2 decades after many of us had believed that history had ended and that liberal democracy had prevailed, we found ourselves looking at democracy in retreat, not just in the US, but around the world. And, for me, this was kind of earth-shattering. This realization. And so that's what led me to kind of transition from working in these private sector companies to joining the Renew Democracy Initiative and to working in sort of the nonprofit space, quite honestly, sooner than I'd expected. One other thing that's kind of important in this consideration is that my parents are both from the Soviet Union. They came to America when they came to America actually in the 70s before it was very popular, and they came here because of the principles that the U.S. represented. Right? They thought they could be free here, and so when I was a kid, my dad would tell me these stories of what it was like to live under Joseph Stalin, and how in 1954, as a teenager, he almost got arrested actually for not crying quickly enough upon hearing of Stalin's death. And, these stories have stayed with me, and they highlighted the importance of these democratic principles, and not just for us, but, for people around the world in oppressive countries who can only dream of, a small portion of the freedoms that we get to enjoy here. And ultimately, that's what RDI is all about. We are looking to help educate people on liberal principles and then empower them to prioritize them in their civic behavior. And so, I can go on in more detail about that, but I'll pause here for a moment, David, and just see kind of where you would like me to go from here.
Yeah, Uriel, thank you. No, that's quite a story, and it's pretty clear what motivated you to get involved in these activities. Kudos on that part. So I know that your organization stands for and tries to promote constitutional values, principles, even civic behavior, which is something that is certainly challenged in this day and age. So as you were going to, let's get a little more specific about some of the activities and some of the results of that.
So I'll give a quick history of RDI, and then I'll go into sort of how we're thinking about our strategy. So RDI was founded in late 2017. The primary kind of mover and shaker behind it was Garry Kasparov. For those that don't know, Gary is widely considered one of the best chess players in history, if not the best chess player in history. And he then made his name kind of in Act 2 of his career as a political figure, and specifically as a dissident in Russia against Vladimir Putin. And since 2013, he's lived in exile in the US. And so he brought together a group of folks that he initially kind of semi-jokingly referred to as refugees from the Wall Street Journal. And so these are folks like Bret Stephens, Max Boot, Mark Lasswell. And they were joined by fellow travelers like Anne Applebaum and others in order to try to address this moment, right? Try to figure out how do we bring back a certain semblance of reasonableness to our politics. And they were joined by a number of other folks from the center left. So we, Senators Heidi Heitkamp and Bob Kerrey, eventually Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, who was the whistleblower that led to Trump's first impeachment. And I will say it's crazy that I have to clarify which impeachment now. That's kind of a first. But anyway, so the board kind of came out to become this uniquely post-partisan, uniquely cross-partisan board of just incredibly fascinating individuals. And when I was hired at the end of 2018 to run the organization. We spent a decent amount of time actually thinking about what we could do, not just to describe what the problems with democracy were, because quite honestly, there's a lot of people already doing that, but more importantly, to actually figure out the specific places that we could plug in to make things better. And so, after sort of spending months doing these analysis, we determined three key things. The first one, I think most of us know, which is that there's a knowledge problem, right? You essentially have 2/3 of Americans who don't even know the three branches of government, who cannot name the three branches of government. So there's just a key knowledge gap between sort of what people need to know about civics and what they do know. And the next is what I call the bad focus group problem. So for those who have been in a focus group, and for those who have been in many focus groups, you probably know what a bad one looks like. That's where you have a group of about 15 people, and then 2 or 3 of them just dominate the conversation. And so the rest of the people assume that those 2 to 3 people are the ones whose views define the acceptable viewpoints, right? And so even if the majority of everybody else disagrees with those viewpoints, they assume that those 2 views represent the majority, because there's kind of this coalition problem where they don't know what everybody else's views are. They only know the views of the loudest people. And so I like to say that the US has become akin to a bad focus group. The loudest voices are the ones dominating the conversation. Even if the majority of us agree on a number of issues, we just assume that we're alone, right? We just assume that the kind of voices on the far, far left or far, far right are actually the ones that represent the majority viewpoint, when just, descriptively, that's not true. And then the last problem that we looked at was what I call a prioritization problem. And that's when, you talk to a lot of folks who, are voting for various candidates where, which nonpartisan groups have determined have in some way gone against democratic principles. A lot of times those people know that. So in other words, a lot of groups keep harping like, oh, so-and-so is racist, or so-and-so has done X, Y, or Z against democracy, and therefore you shouldn't support it. But by harping on those things, you're not changing anything, because a lot of those folks already know about those things and they agree with them and they say that it's a problem. But for them, they're not a high priority, right? They think that a lot of those things belong in the ivory tower, right? For them, it's all about their 401k. Right? Or their bank account or their jobs, et cetera, which are incredibly important and valid concerns. And our job is to show people why these democratic issues are just as important as someone's 401k. And so now all of this brings us sort of to RDI's strategy, which aims to address each of these 3 problems. The first component of the strategy is we want to educate. We want people to understand not just what our system is, but more importantly, why we have the system that we do, right? Even when students get civics education, the reason that it fails, or the reason that it has no notable impact on civic participation or voting, is because all it is rote memorization. We have 535 members of the Congress, right? We have 3 branches of government. Here's what they are, rather than an actual explanation of why or how those things developed. And so, that's the first part, is around education. The second part is we want to highlight more moderate and more reasonable voices. One of the key things that keeps people from prioritizing these issues is thinking that they're alone in caring about them, right? How many times have we sort of been in a conversation and not spoken up because we thought we were alone? So we don't want people to feel alone. We want to highlight the more reasonable voices and give them this sort of amplification that the most radical voices already have. And then last but not least, we want to help people make a more personal connection with these core principles. So in other words, it's not just about why they're there or how they've come about, but also why they're important and why we should care about them. And that involves, communicating in a way that I think a lot of sort of reform-minded folks have a challenge communicating, right? We like to cite studies and facts and figures, which are incredibly important, but we also need to really communicate the human part of the story. And where this brings RDI is what we want to do is a few things. So first, within all of this, we want to, one, create content, primarily video content, because that's where people are, that is going to be incredibly compelling, incredibly dynamic, incredibly exciting, that will feature unique voices, and that will feature unique combinations of voices, right? The former head of the Republican National Committee with 2 former Democratic senators, young people coming at it from completely different perspectives to talk about some of these issues and to offer, that sort of fun and exciting civics education that, quite frankly, most of us didn't really get when we were in school. But the other component, which I think is incredibly important, and it's one of the things that we're focusing on the most right now, is approaching these things from a little bit of a different angle. In other words, we talked about making these things personal and offering a human component to them. What better way is there to help someone understand how important free speech is than to talk to someone who suffered from not having free speech? And so a lot of the content that we're going to be putting out, a lot of the videos and written content that we're working on is going to feature this international bent, an international perspective from people who have suffered for not having these principles. And so overall, what we're looking to do is one, create incredibly compelling video content that will reach a wide variety of people. And two, we want to be amplifying voices that already exist in our communities, that are coming from a more reasonable and more moderate perspective, and looking to build out that coalition and build out that community.
Well, I'd say good luck on all that. I mean, it's hard to argue with those goals and objectives given where we are today. Uriel, I understand you're also promoting the use of petitions in the community as a change agent. Talk about that for a moment.
As petitions serve a few different purposes. So I call petitions kind of an example of a catalytic action. So what do I mean by that? I mean that there is the impact, of course, of the petition on the target audience, right? So for example, one of the petitions that we put out a while ago now, last summer, was in defense of peaceful protesters and calling on the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and others not to use the military against peaceful protesters. So of course, there's the kind of inherent impact of, we want to convince these people not to do the thing that we're asking them not to do. But there's an element of petitions, and I think a lot of groups kind of recognize this, where by virtue of signing that petition, you have just made a commitment to support that issue. You have just sort of set yourself down a path where you are going to prioritize, whatever issue or whatever value you've signed on to protect. And in addition to what I think is, significant value that, certain strategically kind of positioned petitions can have on their target audience, I also think that they actually have a really positive impact on the people who sign them and on the people who join on, because inevitably, once you sign on, you're going to spend maybe 5-10 minutes, whatever, reading about whatever it is that you've just signed on to. And next week, you're going to be a little bit more sensitive to things that are coming out. And so one element of our strategy is, we'll put out, a petition on this, but then we're going to follow up on it, and so then the next week we'll offer another action item, or we'll offer some more content to read or to learn about sort of the underlying issues, that are at play. So, the petition really serves not just to, influence the sort of target audience, but to also help, to help motivate and empower the people signing it.
Very well put. Your goals and objectives clearly are noble, and let's hope you succeed as you are clearly. Uriel, tell us as we close how someone can reach you and get involved in the Renewed Democracy Initiative.
Yeah, so there's a lot of opportunities to get involved on kind of any number of different levels. So obviously, we welcome anyone to come to our website, rdi.org, and subscribe to get our updates, to become a part of the community. We have a lot of really exciting events that we organize, as well as a number of sort of smaller, more private events for people to sign on. Obviously, if you're interested in donating or supporting our work, we would be incredibly grateful. And we think that that's, going to be an incredibly key element of a lot of this advocacy work. And then last but not least, by subscribing and joining us, this isn't just joining and getting a kind of a weekly newsletter or something like that. What we're really looking to build here is a community. And so in the coming weeks and months, what a lot of you who end up coming on board will sort of discover is that we're going to be able to build out, conversations, not just where it's a speaker talking at a group, but rather it's those very folks who have joined us speaking to one another and coming together and supporting one another and trying to get a more reasonable take on the American political system and its role in the world.
Well, Uriel, congratulations on your success thus far, and keep at it for sure. Before I let you go, I noticed the chess set over your shoulder, and you mentioned Gary Kasparov's name. I'm assuming you're not in his league, but maybe I'm wrong.
I am no. I am not. I honestly, there are very talented 6-year-olds out there who could defeat me. So I'm not a talented chess player.
Well, you keep at that too, and good things will happen. Uriel, thank you for your time. We've enjoyed talking with you, and this is another of our programs on behalf of the Bridge Alliance, and Uriel and his colleagues at RDI are clearly working on, as are others, attempting to, as we say, fix America's broken democracy. This has been David Nevins for Citybiz List. Thank you for watching.